Welcome to the Loving Truth Podcast, where it's all about finding clarity, confidence, and peace in the face of marriage challenges. And now your host, relationship expert, and certified master life coach, Sharon Pope.
Hello, loves. This is Sharon Pope, and this is The Loving Truth. Today, I want to share with you a story about a couple that I'm working with right now. I don't often work with couples, but I love to do it when I can. And there's this really cool couple that I'm working with, and they had been struggling for years. I mean, it definitely the last 5 years for sure. But if I asked her, she would probably say something more along the lines of 8 to 10 years. And they've gotten to this really good place. Like they're out of the danger zone, if you will, of their marriage. And they've gotten to this really good place now through our work together where, you know, they're spending more time together and they're talking more and they're opening up more and they're sharing more. And it feels more loving and it feels closer. And so when I get together with them, I often just ask each of them, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling about the marriage? And on our last call together, I asked that same question and he said, I think we're doing great. He was feeling really good about the marriage. And then I looked to her and she said, well, we're doing better, but you know, we still have a long way to go. And I looked at her husband and he looked, I don't know, a little bit hurt and a little bit confused by the way that she answered that question. But I've worked with them for a little while now and I know them well enough. And so we just dove right into it. And one of the things that I shared with her, or really just reminded her of, was that when it comes to our marriages, there is no mountaintop experience that you live and exist in forever. Like I think we think about personal growth and tending to our goals as if we never fall back from them. It's like this perfectly straight line from the lower left up to the upper right. And we grow and it gets better and it gets better and it gets better and it gets better. And then we've reached this mountaintop experience where we're always going to feel loving and we're always going to feel connected and we're never going to annoy one another. We're never going to argue or disagree. And there's no there when it comes to our marriages. It's like there's always going to be an ebb and flow in our marriages. And relationships in general, particularly our intimate relationships, it's always in a cycle of being in connection, getting to a place of disconnection, and then repairing that disconnection and getting back to a place of reconnection. And it's just this cyclical thing. And that's how it's supposed to be. There's nothing that's gone wrong. Now, in most relationships, there's someone like my client who is always reaching for more. And it's typically the woman. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we'll talk about. But they're reaching for more love, more joy, more connection, more closeness, more passion, more intimacy, just more. And so they're less likely to be as satisfied in the relationship. And then many times they're married to someone, in my scenario or in my world, that's typically the man. And they're married to someone who genuinely loves their spouse and appreciates what they've built together. They're sort of that steady Eddie in the relationship where one person's reaching for more, the other person is like, we're good, and not reaching for more. So on this particular day, she had said to me, you know, I think we put the wrong person in charge of the relationship. Now, let me explain to you what I mean. So we assigned one person to tend to the marriage. I feel strongly about this because I feel like because no one has taken responsibility for it, it doesn't get done, if you will. Like no one is just in the same way that you make sure that your kids' homework is done and that they have their favorite snacks in the cupboard and there's food in the refrigerator and something you can put together for dinner. Because someone is in charge of doing that. And so it gets done. But when no one is in charge of tending to the relationship or the health and stability of the relationship, making sure that the two of you stay connected, it just doesn't get done. And it's as simple as we never put anyone in charge of that. We put someone in charge of taking out the trash, so we make sure that gets done once a week, don't we? But we never put anyone in charge of the relationship. And so therefore, no one's paying attention to it. And then we wonder why it drifts away and gets disconnected and gets to a place of real struggle. So one of the very first things that we did together in our work was we put someone in charge of the relationship. Now, my friends, this does not always have to be, and nor should it always be, the woman. I get that the woman, generally speaking, is the caretaker of the relationship, but women also carry an awful lot inside of marriages. And so we should not automatically assume that we can just pile this other thing on her plate. And so with this particular couple that I'm working with, she is the front row parent for their kids. And so because of that, they both agreed, you know what, let's let him be the caretaker for our relationship. And frankly, he's doing a great job. And it shows up in the littlest of ways. It shows up when he brings her a cup of coffee in the morning before she even gets out of bed. It shows up when he pours 2 glasses of rosé and they pop out onto their deck out back and have 30 minutes of just time for the two of them to connect. So it's those little things. It doesn't have to be this big orchestrated thing. It can just be making sure that the two of you are making time to connect with each other during very busy lives and very busy days. So anyway, we go back to this conversation and she says, you know, I'm not sure we put the right person in charge of tending to the relationship. And what she means is that because she's wanting more all the time and he gets very satisfied, well, then he's going to sort of, I don't want to say give up, but he's going to stop pushing or not push as hard as she might. And so then she feels like she's not going to reach that sort of mountaintop experience, right? So, you know, here's how I think about this. Her approach to relationships is not wrong. Like always wanting more love and more closeness and more connection and more intimacy, like that's a beautiful thing. And I would never say that's wrong and you shouldn't feel that way. But usually the person that is the one that's pushing for more, they very much think that their way is the right way to be. And so then they see their partner as not doing it right or not doing it as they would do it for sure. And his approach isn't wrong either. I think having someone who can hold that steady place for the relationship is really important and equally as beautiful to, and it's also necessary to the health and the stability of the relationship long term. So let's talk about how we get here. Like, why is there someone who's always pushing for more and someone who isn't pushing for more? Or in your mind, maybe isn't pushing hard enough or reaching far enough inside the relationship. So the people who are pushing for more, let's think about how we got here. Many times it's because they grew up in an environment where nothing was ever good enough. So they always had to push for more. They always had to get better grades. They always had to outperform the person next to them. They always had to push themselves. Or they had what I would call the not enough wound, where it's a little bit like nothing is ever good enough, but it makes them feel like now I'm not enough as I am. I'm not worthy and important just because I exist. So my worthiness and my value and my importance comes from what I produce. So therefore, I always have to be producing more and more and more in order to maintain my value. It's a hustle. But depending upon if you grew up in that type of an environment, it's really easy to see how you got to this place where now as an adult in your marriage, you're always pushing and pushing for more. It's an old wound that's still playing out in your life. And then if you sort of layer on the difference between the way that boys and girls are socialized and the way that they're socialized, then that comes into their lives as adult men and women. Women have always had to push harder. Right? When women wanted a seat at the table in the working world, they had to push harder. They had to grow. They had to learn how to do it in a man's world. So they had to learn how to do it in a man's way because men weren't going to learn the female way of doing things. So women have always had to push and reach for more. It's why, it's getting better now, but women used to be like the only people that were engaging in self-help and personal growth because they were always pushing for more. But men didn't have to push that hard for more, if you really think about it. And I'm talking over the course of centuries and then the last few decades. But now it's getting a little bit more equal, where men are getting more involved in personal development and personal growth and things like that. But here's the other thing to think about. Is that for the person who's always pushing for more, it sort of puts your partner into a place of feeling like they can't win. Because even when they win, right, even when they reach that, we feel a little bit more closeness, and he's feeling really good about it, but she's like, yeah, but there's still more. We can still do more. We're not there yet. It's sort of like, well, as soon as I reach a new milestone, you just keep moving the marker out further and further and further. And so there's no end in sight for that. And so it can lead to feeling like, well, why bother trying? Because it's never quite good enough. So the wound that you might have had as a child of nothing's ever good enough now shows up in your marriage where when you're thinking, I have to keep pushing for more. I have to keep reaching for more in this marriage. And it leads your partner to feeling like nothing's ever good enough. So we just sort of perpetuate these wounds inside of our lives and inside of our marriage until we become, more aware of them. Because once you become conscious of these wounds and we can see how they're playing out in our lives, that's when we can really make change. We can say, is this serving me now? Like it might have served me as a kid, but is it serving me now today? And again, there's no right or wrong in any of this. Wanting more in your marriage is beautiful, and holding steady and really genuinely loving and appreciating what you have is also a really beautiful thing. I think that when I think about my own marriage, thank God that D is as steady as he is. Because I'll tell you what, I think him being that steady makes me more brave. Makes me take more risks and push myself a little bit further in other sort of subtle ways. And so I genuinely value and appreciate that he does get satisfied and feels solid and steady in their relationship. Dr. Alexandra Solomon calls this holding center, that steadiness of just holding center for the relationship. It's the stability inside the relationship. Now, this can lead to a bit of a broader discussion around the differences that we have inside of our relationship. And I think that there's always going to be differences, right? We're not going to be carbon copies of one another. And that's not required in order for us to be happy. As a matter of fact, what brought us together early on in the relationship, believe it or not, it was the differences. Because people who are different than we are interesting, right? And so that it draws us into people and wants us to, we want to get to know them and understand them. It's intriguing. It brings us together. Our differences at the beginning bring us together. But it feels like once we get married, that now we're supposed to be carbon copies of each other and enjoy doing the same things and think the same way and parent the same way and have the same sort of eating style and health protocols and all this kind of stuff. We keep thinking that like it's got to be the same. And in this way, it's like, oh, we should both always be reaching for more, continuous improvement. Maybe not, So if we can come at those differences from being able to see what's awesome about the fact that my partner is different from me in this way, and you really go looking for what's great about their perspective versus my own, instead of assuming your way is the right way and he or she should really just be like you, instead we go, what's great about this? Like, so for instance, another example with D and I, D is really chill and very laid back, where I'm very like amped up. I got podcasts to shoot. I've got reels to shoot. I've got a coaching call. I've got like, I'm doing a lot in any given day, where he's a little bit more chill. We're very, very different in that way. And there were certainly times early on in our relationship when I felt that difference, and I for sure thought that my way was the right way and he really needed to pick up the pace and, keep up. And now what I can tell you is, because I've been doing this work for more than 12 years now, is that what's awesome about his calmness and his steadiness is that it calms me. It gives me that safe place to just land and exhale at the end of all my busyness and all my doing. And so now I've gotten to a place of where I genuinely appreciate the fact that he is very, very different than me. And I can find real beauty in that. And so if you can do the same thing of go look for what's awesome about the fact that your spouse approaches something very differently than you do, and how maybe, just maybe, it fits together really well with the distinction between the way you do it and the way he does it, even especially if it's opposites. Then it might just enhance the totality of the relationship or the way in which you function. Even when you're very, very different, like what I was talking about with D and I, where I'm always doing and he's more chill. It's like we complement each other in a really beautiful way. So go looking for the beauty of those differences. Until next time, take really good care.
If you're listening to this podcast because you're struggling to decide whether to stay or go in your marriage, and you're serious about finding that answer, it's time to book a Truth and Clarity session with a member of my team. On the call, we'll discuss where you are in your marriage and explore if there's a fit for you and I to work together so you can make and execute the right decision for you and your marriage. Go to clarityformymarriage.com to fill out an application now. That's clarityformymarriage.com.